April of 1986, disaster struck a small city in modern Ukraine, then part of the USSR. It left behind something so radioactive and deadly that just 30 seconds near it meant almost a certain and painful death. Now, I was looking for something to do a couple weeks ago, and I stumbled across the Chernobyl miniseries on Amazon Prime. And I thought, yeah, I would like to watch this for the fourth time. So I threw it on, binged it all in a day and a half, and it inspired me to make this video because it got me thinking, nearly 40 years later, how deadly is everything today? And the answer might surprise you, so let's talk about it.
What does the decimeter say?
3.6 Roentgen, but that's as high as the meter.
3.6. Not great, not terrible.
So if you don't know what Chernobyl was, or just need a refresher, on April 26, 1986, a night crew of nuclear power plant workers were stationed at Chernobyl Reactor 4 to conduct a routine safety test of the reactor. Now, this night crew might not have been the most experienced, but they also weren't set up for success. Basically, a string of mistakes and poor planning ultimately led to the most catastrophic nuclear explosion we've seen to date. And what mistakes, you might ask? Well, let's just say you had to be built different to work in a nuclear power plant in the 1980s Soviet Union.
Take it down. Good. Like that.
You should have finished by now.
We're following protocol for reduction rate.
You're procrastinating. There are 10 other men in this plant would have done it already.
So this safety test was meant to determine whether or not the reactor's turbines could provide enough electricity to keep the coolant pumps running in the event of a power outage. So basically it was a backup power test in case of an emergency. How ironic. But unfortunately, much to the disappointment of my parents, I did not go to school to be a nuclear engineer, so I had to use a good buddy of mine, Chatithin, to help break down exactly what went wrong and how the situation got from bad to worse. The first mistake was they ran the power too low. So the reactor was operating at a very low power, which made it unstable. Think of trying to keep a campfire going with just a tiny few embers. The second mistake was they pulled out too many control rods. Now, these control rods help control the reactor's power, kind of like brakes on a car. They ended up removing way too many of these control rods, which made the reactor go a little wild. Now, another thing, this wasn't really a mistake, but the reactor had a bad design flaw, and it was kind of labeled as a fatal flaw in the case of Chernobyl. But yeah, the RBMK reactor had a dangerous feature, which was the AZ5 button. Now, what this button does is it inserts all of the control rods back into the reactor, but the tips of the rods are made of graphite. So instead of calming the reactor down, when the graphite tips first entered the reactor again, it sped up the reaction for a few seconds, causing a massive energy surge. Now, imagine having a pot of boiling water on the stove and trying to turn it off, but instead of turning it off, it acted as like a maximum heat button for a few seconds. This is essentially what happened, but that brief power surge actually blew the reactor apart before the control rods could do their job, leading to the explosion that is still indirectly felt in many ways to this very day. But with the explosion aside, what I really want to talk about today is the elephant's foot. Now, this is what made me so interested in the whole Chernobyl story in the first place, because the fact that it really exists is so beautifully haunting. I mean, knowing that I could technically just go there and see it, I mean, I'd probably need permits and I'd need to have a death wish, but assuming I wanted to, I could go see this. Like, this thing exists, it's a real thing. And yeah, it's just really interesting to me. But the elephant's foot was the name given to the massive corium that was left behind in the aftermath of the explosion. So the aftermath of Chernobyl is where a lot of the crazy stuff happened. And in this case specifically, corium is basically a mess of melted control rods, concrete, uranium, and graphite, or basically the stereotypical nuclear waste that you would see in TV shows and movies.
Let him dream.
What is this stuff?
Yeah, it's some nuclear waste. Dear me, does anyone else feel a trifle queasy?
Now, the elephant's foot was discovered in December 1986, so this was a couple months after the explosion anyways, and some Soviet scientists and plant workers, or AKA the poor motherfuckers that were sent out there to check the wreckage, They traveled deep into Reactor 4's ruins, trying to figure out what the melted nuclear fuel had turned into. When they finally found it, the massive black twisted blob was so radioactive that just standing near it for a couple of minutes could be a death sentence. The radiation levels were around 10,000 Roentgen per hour, which was enough to make the Geiger counters basically break. It was crazy. So how did these guys survive? Well, speed and strategy. They limited their time near it to literally seconds. They didn't spend any more than seconds in that room. They used mirrors to peek around the corners, and when they were taking pictures, they snapped the pictures really fast. One of the most famous shots was taken by this guy named Artur Korneev. And this was a radiation specialist who casually posed near the thing because, you know, why not, right? He lived for many years after, but many of the other workers suffered serious radiation effects. So needless to say, he was taking a chance with that one. But it is crazy to think that this lethal nuclear monster was just sitting there hanging out in the basement for all this time, emitting so much damn radiation that it could take down a human being in less than a minute. So how dangerous is it today? Well, back in 1986, it was basically a death sentence on site. If you walked near it even just for a few seconds, it would cook your insides with radiation. And this is not a fun way to go out. I don't know if you've never seen the Chernobyl miniseries. I don't think I can post a clip of it on here because it's really awful. But you basically just rot away from the inside out. Your cells can no longer reproduce. So once they die like they naturally do and reproduce, in this case they don't reproduce because the radiation just shreds through your DNA. It's really brutal to look at. But fast forward to today, it is a lot less deadly, but it's not exactly safe. So back in the day it was 10,000 Roentgens per hour. Now it's down to a couple hundred millisieverts per hour in some spots, which is still way too much for comfort, but you could stand near it for a couple hours before getting sick. Not that you'd want to, but the elephant's foot has also cooled down and become a lot more stable over the years, so it's no longer melting through the floor like some sort of nuclear horror movie, but it will stay radioactive for thousands of years, and that's not going to change anytime. So it's kind of like a constant reminder of you'll regret this later kind of thing. These days, scientists can still visit in protective gear for short periods of time, and they do. And the elephant's foot is still chilling in the basement of Reactor 4, and it's a relic of one of the worst disasters in human history. But with Chernobyl, it's just a reminder now of the powers and dangers of nuclear energy. Now, you can be pro-nuclear energy, you can be anti-nuclear energy. I mean, there's no debating the efficiency of nuclear power. But when stuff like this happens, that's when it opens the door to having that conversation. You know, is this really the best way to generate energy? Is this really the safest way to do it? This is something that will happen after any disaster, just like Fukushima. Even though that wasn't directly human error, it's still something that you want to talk about and discuss because it affects a lot of people. But the elephant's foot's legacy will outlive all of us because it will take thousands of years for it to completely decay, cool off, and no longer emit radiation. But if this is something that interests you at all, I really do recommend watching the Chernobyl HBO miniseries. A lot of the clips I used in this video are from that TV series. Fantastic. I can't say enough good things about it. Like I said at the beginning, I've watched it like 4 or 5 times now, and every single time I watch it, it's just as magical, just as haunting and thrilling. But I hope you learned something new today. Don't ever go and visit this thing, but it's cool to know that it exists out there. And if you're ever in Europe, in Ukraine, or Western Poland, or Eastern Poland rather, anything like that, just know that it's close by, and it's pretty eerie to think about. But yeah, thanks for watching. Take care.